She was rejected for bringing her daughter to the interview until the Millionaire CEO walked in. Natalie Hayes had been running on pure hope and desperation for 3 months, and this morning, both were being tested to their absolute limits. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror at 5:30, applying makeup with shaking hands, while her 5-year-old daughter Rosie slept peacefully in the next room. Today was the final interview at Harrington Enterprises, a prestigious tech company where she'd applied for a senior project coordinator position. After losing her job when her previous employer downsized, after losing her apartment when she couldn't make rent, after months of rejection emails and unanswered applications, this felt like her last real chance. She'd aced the phone screening. She'd impressed the hiring manager during the second-round video interview. Now all that stood between her and financial stability was this final panel interview with the executive team. But life, as it had proven repeatedly over the past year, had other plans. At 6:45, her phone rang. The babysitter. "Natalie, I'm so sorry." Karen's voice was thick with congestion and misery. "I have the flu. I can't watch Rosie today. I know it's your big interview, but I literally can't get out of bed without feeling like I'm going to pass out." Natalie's heart dropped into her stomach. "Karen, please. I can't reschedule. This is the final interview. If I cancel now, they'll give the position to someone else." "I'm sorry," Karen repeated. Then the line went quiet except for the sound of coughing. "I really am. But I can't help you today. I hope you find someone." The call ended, and Natalie stood frozen in her tiny bedroom in the extended stay motel where she and Rosie had been living for the past 2 months. She had no family nearby. Her parents had died in a car accident 5 years ago, shortly before Rosie was born. Her ex-husband, Travis, had disappeared 2 years ago when Rosie was 3, abandoning them both without warning or support. The few friends she'd maintained after the separation were either working themselves or lived too far away to help on such short notice. The interview was at 9. It was now nearly 7. She had 2 hours to figure out childcare for her daughter or miss the opportunity she'd been fighting for since August. Before we continue with this emotional story, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you believe everyone deserves a fair chance regardless of their circumstances. The stories we share here aren't just entertainment, they're reminders that compassion and understanding can change lives. Now let's see what happens when Natalie faces an impossible choice. Natalie called every backup contact in her phone. The community center daycare didn't open until 8:30, which wouldn't give her enough time. The emergency childcare service had a 3-hour wait list. Her neighbor at the motel, a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, was visiting her daughter in another state. Every option led to a dead end, and with each failed attempt, Natalie felt her carefully constructed composure cracking. She sat on the edge of the bed, looking at her professional outfit hanging on the closet door, then at her sleeping daughter. Rosie's small face was peaceful, her worn teddy bear clutched tight against her chest. That bear, Mr. Snuggles, had been with her since she was a baby, loved into tattiness but irreplaceable. Natalie had 2 choices: cancel the interview and watch her last chance at stability disappear, or take Rosie with her and hope for understanding that probably wouldn't come. She made her decision at 7:15. There was no real choice. She couldn't give up. She wouldn't give up. Not when she'd come this far. Not when Rosie was depending on her. "Sweetheart," Natalie gently woke her daughter. "I need you to get up. We're going on an adventure today." Rosie rubbed her eyes sleepily. "What kind of adventure, Mama?" "A very important one," Natalie said, forcing brightness into her voice. "Mama has a very important meeting today, and you get to come with me to a big fancy building. But I need you to be extra good, okay? Extra quiet and still." Rosie nodded solemnly. At 5 years old, she'd learned more about being quiet and still than any child should have to. She'd learned it during the months when money was so tight that they'd lived on pasta and peanut butter. She'd learned it during the nights in the motel when they had to be careful not to disturb other guests. She'd learned it through all the ways their life had become precarious and uncertain. Natalie dressed Rosie in her best outfit, a simple navy dress that was getting too small but still looked presentable. She brushed her daughter's dark curls carefully, washed her face, made sure she looked neat and clean. Then she packed a small bag with quiet activities, coloring books, crayons, Mr. Snuggles, a granola bar and juice box in case Rosie got hungry. They took 2 buses to reach Harrington Enterprises, the journey eating up an hour and leaving them arriving at the building with just 10 minutes to spare. Natalie's professional clothes felt wrong now, too formal for someone traveling on public transportation with a 5-year-old in tow. But there was no time to second guess. They were here. They had to go through with it. The Harrington Enterprises building was impressive and intimidating in equal measure. All glass and steel, soaring 30 stories into the sky, looking like the kind of place where important people made important decisions that affected thousands of lives. Natalie held Rosie's hand tightly as they walked through the revolving doors into a lobby that screamed money and success. The receptionist's perfectly made-up face registered surprise, then thinly veiled disapproval when she saw Rosie. "Can I help you?" "Natalie Hayes," Natalie said, trying to sound confident despite the way her voice wanted to shake. "I have a 9 o'clock interview with the executive team for the senior project coordinator position." The receptionist's eyes flicked to Rosie again, down to the worn teddy bear clutched in small hands, then back to Natalie with an expression that suggested she was already being judged and found wanting. "I'll let them know you're here. You can wait over there." She gestured to a seating area with expensive leather chairs and a coffee table covered in business magazines. Natalie led Rosie to the furthest corner seat, hyper-aware of the stares from other people in the lobby. A man in an expensive suit looked at them with open curiosity. 2 women in sharp business attire whispered behind their hands. Natalie felt shame burn hot in her cheeks, but she lifted her chin and helped Rosie get settled with her coloring book. "Remember what Mama said," she whispered. "Extra quiet and still, okay?" "Okay, Mama," Rosie whispered back, already focused on coloring a picture of a princess. At 9:03, a woman in her 40s with severe hair and a charcoal suit approached them. "Miss Hayes, I'm Linda Marsh, VP of Human Resources. We're ready for you." Her eyes landed on Rosie, and her expression went from professional to cold. "Is there a reason you brought a child to a professional interview?" "My babysitter fell ill this morning," Natalie explained, standing and gathering Rosie's small hand in hers. "I had no other options, and I didn't want to miss this opportunity." "She'll be quiet. She won't be any trouble." Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. "This is highly unusual and unprofessional. We're conducting important business, not running a daycare." "I understand," Natalie said, hating how small her voice sounded. "But please, I've come this far in the process. I'm highly qualified for this position. My daughter won't interfere with the interview. I promise." Linda looked like she wanted to refuse, to send Natalie away right there in the lobby. But something, maybe the desperation in Natalie's eyes or the professional obligation to at least go through with scheduled interviews, made her sigh sharply. "Fine, but she sits quietly in the corner. No noise, no disruption. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear," Natalie said, relief flooding through her. "Thank you." They followed Linda to an elevator that carried them to the 18th floor, then down a hallway lined with photographs of important company achievements and awards. The conference room was even more intimidating than the lobby. A long table with 8 chairs, 6 of them occupied by executives in expensive suits, all looking at Natalie and Rosie with varying degrees of surprise and disapproval. "This is Natalie Hayes," Linda announced, taking her seat at the head of the table, "and apparently her daughter, who she's brought to our executive interview." The way she said it made it sound like Natalie had committed some unforgivable breach of protocol. Maybe she had. Natalie swallowed her embarrassment and helped Rosie settle in a chair against the wall, as far from the table as possible. "Stay here, baby. Color your pictures. Mama will be done soon." Then she took her seat across from the panel, acutely aware that she was starting at a disadvantage, that every person at this table was already questioning her judgment and professionalism. The woman to Linda's right, mid-40s with sharp red lipstick and sharper eyes, leaned forward. "Miss Hayes, I'm Patricia Chen, Director of Operations. Before we begin with standard interview questions, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. You brought a child to a professional interview?" "My childcare fell through this morning," Natalie explained again, forcing herself to maintain eye contact despite wanting to look away from Patricia's judgmental stare. My babysitter became ill, and I had no backup options. I didn't want to cancel and lose this opportunity, so I made the difficult decision to bring my daughter. She's very well behaved and won't be a distraction. The fact that you thought this was acceptable shows a concerning lack of judgment, Patricia said coldly. In a professional environment, we expect employees to maintain clear boundaries between their personal lives and their work responsibilities. Can you honestly tell us you'd be able to do that if we hired you? Natalie felt anger flash hot beneath her fear. With respect, Miss Chen, being a single mother doesn't make me less professional or less capable. It makes me more determined, more organized, and more skilled at managing complex situations under pressure. I've reviewed the job description thoroughly. Nothing about this role requires me to work unusual hours or travel extensively. It's a standard 9-to-5 position with clearly defined responsibilities that I'm more than qualified to handle. But how can we trust you won't bring your personal problems to work? Asked another executive, a man in his 50s with graying hair. What happens when your daughter is sick, or your childcare falls through like it did today? Are we supposed to accommodate your parenting schedule over our business needs? Every employee has personal lives that occasionally intersect with their professional responsibilities, Natalie said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Parents, yes, but also people caring for aging parents, people with medical conditions, people with any number of personal circumstances that require occasional flexibility. The question isn't whether I have a daughter. The question is whether I have the skills, experience, and work ethic to excel in this role, and I believe my resume and previous interviews have demonstrated that I do. Patricia's expression didn't soften. We don't hire people who can't separate their personal lives from work. This company requires dedication, focus, and the ability to prioritize our business needs. Frankly, Miss Hayes, your presence here today with a child suggests you can't meet those standards. Natalie felt tears threaten but refused to let them fall. She'd known this was a risk. She'd known bringing Rosie might cost her the job. But hearing it said so bluntly, having her parenting and her professionalism questioned by people who'd never walked a day in her shoes, it hurt in ways she couldn't fully articulate. I understand, she said quietly, the fight draining out of her. I apologize for wasting your time. She started to stand, ready to gather Rosie and leave with whatever dignity she had remaining, when the conference room door opened. A tall man in a tailored navy suit walked in, his presence immediately commanding attention. He had dark hair threaded with silver at the temples, sharp features softened by genuinely kind eyes, and an air of authority that made it clear he was someone important. The entire panel stood immediately. Linda's voice was flustered. Mr. Wolf, we weren't expecting you. I thought you were at the conference in San Francisco through Wednesday. Flight was cancelled due to weather, the man said, his voice deep and calm. Figured I'd come in and catch up on what I missed. What's going on here? His eyes moved to Natalie, then to Rosie sitting quietly in the corner with her coloring book, then back to the panel of executives who suddenly looked nervous. We were concluding an interview, sir, Patricia said quickly. Miss Hayes here brought a child to her final interview. We were just explaining why that's unacceptable in a professional setting. Adrian Wolf's gaze returned to Rosie, who'd looked up at all the commotion and was watching the adults with wide, uncertain eyes. Then he looked at Natalie, really looked at her, and Natalie saw something shift in his expression. Not pity, which she couldn't have tolerated, but understanding, recognition of something he saw in her face. She brought her reason to succeed, Adrian said quietly. Her motivation for wanting this job, her purpose for working hard and being dedicated. He turned to the panel. Did any of you actually review her qualifications, her experience, her interview performance up to this point? Linda cleared her throat. Sir, with all respect, the issue isn't her qualifications. It's her judgment in bringing a child. I asked about her qualifications, Adrian interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying an edge of steel that made it clear this wasn't a request. Patricia, you've been involved in this hiring process. Tell me about Miss Hayes' background. Patricia looked flustered but pulled up Natalie's file on her tablet. She has a bachelor's degree in business management, 6 years of project coordination experience, strong references from her previous employer, excellent communication skills demonstrated in her phone and video interviews, technical proficiency in all the software we use. She scored highest among all candidates on our skills assessment test. So she's the most qualified candidate you've interviewed, Adrian said. It wasn't a question. On paper, yes, Patricia admitted. But, no buts, Adrian said firmly. He walked over to where Rosie sat, crouching down to her level with a gentle smile. Hi there, what's your name? Rosie looked at her mother for permission. Natalie nodded, too shocked by this turn of events to do anything else. Rosie, her daughter said quietly. That's a beautiful name, Adrian said warmly. And who's this? He gestured to the teddy bear. Mr. Snuggles, Rosie said, hugging the bear tighter. He's my best friend. Mr. Snuggles looks very important, Adrian said seriously. I bet he takes good care of you. He glanced at the coloring book. That's a beautiful princess you're coloring. Are you an artist? Rosie smiled shyly. Mama says I'm very creative. I bet you are, Adrian said. He stood and turned back to Natalie. Miss Hayes, would you mind stepping into my office? I'd like to speak with you about this position. The panel looked shocked. Patricia started to protest. Sir, we haven't completed our evaluation process. Consider it complete, Adrian said. Miss Hayes, please follow me. Rosie, you can bring Mr. Snuggles and your coloring book. I have a comfortable couch in my office where you can sit. Natalie stood on shaking legs, gathering Rosie's things with trembling hands, barely able to process what was happening. The CEO of Harrington Enterprises, a man she'd only seen in business magazines and company websites, was personally intervening in her interview. She didn't know if that was good or bad, but she followed him out of the conference room under the shocked stares of the executive panel. Adrian's office was on the 20th floor, accessed by a private elevator. It was spacious but surprisingly warm for a corporate executive space. Large windows overlooked the city. Bookshelves lined one wall filled with both business texts and fiction, and there was indeed a comfortable leather couch where Rosie immediately settled with her coloring book. Would you like some juice? Adrian asked Rosie. I keep some in my mini fridge for when my nephew visits. Yes, please, Rosie said politely, remembering her manners. Adrian retrieved a juice box and a package of crackers, setting them on the coffee table where Rosie could reach. Then he gestured for Natalie to sit in one of the chairs across from his desk while he took his own seat. I'm sorry, Natalie said before he could speak. I know bringing Rosie was unprofessional, but my babysitter cancelled this morning and I had no backup, and I couldn't afford to reschedule because I need this job so desperately, and I just thought maybe if I explained— Breathe, Adrian interrupted gently. Just take a breath, Miss Hayes. Natalie did as instructed, drawing in shaky breaths until her racing heart started to slow. Now, Adrian said, his expression kind but serious. Tell me about yourself. Not the resume version, the real version. Why do you need this job? Something about his tone, about the genuine interest in his eyes, made Natalie's carefully constructed professional walls crumble. I lost my job 3 months ago when my company downsized, she said, the words coming fast now that she'd started. I'd been barely making ends meet before that, raising Rosie alone after my husband abandoned us 2 years ago. When the job disappeared, I couldn't make rent. We were evicted. We've been living in an extended stay motel for 2 months, and our savings are almost gone. She paused, wiping at tears that had started falling despite her best efforts. I've applied to over 100 positions. Most never responded. Others rejected me after seeing I have a child, like they did in there. This was the closest I've gotten to actually landing something, a stable job with benefits and decent pay, a chance to rebuild, to give Rosie the life she deserves, instead of this precarious existence where we're one crisis away from homelessness. Adrian listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, then asked, What makes you think you'd be good at this role? The question caught Natalie off guard. I have the qualifications. I scored highest on your skills test. I have excellent references. That's not what I asked, Adrian said. I asked what makes you think you'd be good at this specific role. Natalie thought about it, really thought about it. Because I'm good at managing chaos, she said finally. Project coordination is essentially controlled chaos. Multiple moving parts, competing priorities, unexpected obstacles. For the past 2 years, I've been managing the chaos of single parenthood with limited resources. I've learned to plan ahead, anticipate problems, create backup plans for my backup plans. I've learned to communicate clearly, to stay calm under pressure, to find creative solutions when conventional options aren't available. She looked directly at Adrian. Being a single mother has made me better at my job, not worse. It's taught me skills that can't be learned in a classroom or from a textbook. Time management, crisis response, resource allocation, empathy for people in difficult situations. Those aren't weaknesses, they're strengths. And any employer who can't see that is missing out on exactly the kind of dedicated, skilled employee they claim to want. Adrian smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "You're hired." Natalie stared at him. "What?" "You're hired," he repeated. "Standard salary for the position is $65,000 annually, but I'm starting you at $70,000 because your skills assessment scores were exceptional. Full benefits including health insurance starting on your first day. 3 weeks paid vacation, 10 sick days. Standard 9 to 5 schedule unless you choose to work flexible hours, which we accommodate. You can start next Monday." I don't understand," Natalie managed. "The panel rejected me. They said, 'The panel doesn't make the final hiring decisions,'" Adrian said. "I do, and I say, you're exactly what this company needs. Someone who knows what it means to work hard. Someone who understands dedication because you're living it every day. Someone who won't take this opportunity for granted because you know how precious it is." Tears were streaming down Natalie's face now, too many to stop or hide. "Why? Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Adrian's expression grew distant, touched by old pain. "Because 15 years ago, I was in a position similar to yours. My company was struggling. I had debts I couldn't pay. I had an investor meeting scheduled, make or break moment for my business. But my nephew, who I was raising after my sister's death, got sick that morning. Daycare wouldn't take him. I had no other options, so I brought him to the meeting." He shook his head at the memory. "The investors were furious. They called me unprofessional, said I wasn't serious about my business if I couldn't even arrange proper childcare. They walked out. I lost the funding. My company almost failed." "What happened?" Natalie asked quietly. "Another investor saw the whole thing," Adrian said. "He approached me afterward and asked why I'd brought a sick kid to an investor meeting. I explained about my sister, about raising my nephew alone, about having no backup options, and he said something I've never forgotten. 'You didn't bring a problem. You brought your purpose. The reason you're building this company. I'll fund you, not despite your circumstances, but because of them.'" Adrian looked at Natalie directly. "That investment saved my company. More than that, it taught me that the people who succeed against impossible odds are exactly the people worth investing in. You didn't need a chance today, Miss Hayes. You just needed someone to see you. I see you, and I'm hiring you because you're the best candidate, not in spite of your circumstances, but because of who those circumstances have made you." Natalie couldn't speak. She sat in that expensive office chair in front of this powerful man who just changed her life, and she cried. Not quiet, dignified tears, but deep, gulping sobs of relief and gratitude and overwhelming emotion. Rosie looked up from her coloring, worried. "Mama, why are you crying?" "Happy tears, baby," Natalie managed. "These are very, very happy tears." Adrian pulled a box of tissues from his desk drawer and set them where Natalie could reach. He waited patiently while she composed herself, not rushing her, not making her feel embarrassed about her emotional response. Finally, when Natalie could breathe again, she asked, "What about the panel? Patricia and the others? They're not going to be happy about this." "They'll adjust," Adrian said with a slight smile. "And honestly, Miss Hayes, their reaction today revealed some things about our company culture that need addressing. We claim to value diversity and inclusion, but apparently that only extends to people whose lives fit into neat, conventional boxes. You're going to help me change that." "I don't understand," Natalie said. The senior project coordinator position is still yours, Adrian explained. But I'm also adding a special project. I want you to work with HR to review our family-friendly policies and make recommendations for improvements. Flexible scheduling, backup childcare resources, parental leave policies, support for single parents. I've been meaning to overhaul our approach for years, but I needed someone with actual experience in these challenges. Someone who knows what working parents need because they're living it. That's you. Natalie felt fresh tears threaten. You're giving me extra responsibility on top of the job you just hired me for? With extra compensation, Adrian said. It'll be included in your offer letter. And Miss Hayes, you can bring Rosie to work occasionally if you need to. We'll create a small area in your office with toys and books. I don't want childcare emergencies to cause you stress or make you choose between your daughter and your job. We'll work it out together. I don't know what to say except thank you, Natalie whispered. You've changed my life. Both our lives. You changed your own life, Adrian corrected gently. You made the hard choice to show up today. You advocated for yourself, even when people were ready to dismiss you. You demonstrated exactly the kind of courage and determination this company needs. I just opened a door. You're the one who has to walk through it and prove yourself, but I have no doubt you will. They spent the next hour going over details, salary, benefits, start date, reporting structure. Adrian called down to HR and instructed them to process Natalie's paperwork immediately. When she left his office 2 hours after arriving, she had a formal offer letter, an employee handbook, and a start date of the following Monday. She and Rosie took the bus back to the motel, and Natalie felt like she was floating. Everything had changed in a single morning. The desperation and fear that had consumed her for months had been replaced with hope and possibility. "Mama," Rosie said as they walked from the bus stop, "I like the nice man with the big office. He was kind to me." "He was kind to both of us," Natalie agreed, squeezing her daughter's hand. "Very, very kind." That night, after Rosie was asleep, Natalie sat on the motel bed and cried again. But these weren't tears of stress or despair. They were tears of gratitude and relief and cautious joy. Someone had seen her. Someone had looked past the circumstances and the single-parent status and the desperate situation, and they'd seen her value. Adrian Wolfe had given her more than a job. He'd given her dignity. He'd reminded her that being a single mother didn't make her less capable or less professional. It made her stronger. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Natalie believed it. Natalie's first day at Harrington Enterprises started at 8:30 on Monday morning. She dropped Rosie off at a new daycare facility that Adrian had recommended, a place with excellent reviews and, more importantly, a scholarship program for single parents that covered most of the cost. As Natalie signed the enrollment paperwork, the director had smiled warmly and said, "Mr. Wolfe called personally to vouch for you. He doesn't do that for just anyone." Now Natalie stood in the lobby of Harrington Enterprises, wearing a professional outfit she'd purchased over the weekend with part of the signing bonus. Adrian had insisted on including in her offer. She felt transformed from the desperate woman who'd walked through these doors 5 days ago with her daughter in tow. But she also felt terrified. What if she couldn't live up to Adrian's faith in her? What if the executive panel had been right to doubt her? Miss Hayes, a young woman with a bright smile, approached. "I'm Jessica Martinez, your assistant. Mr. Wolfe asked me to show you to your office and help you get settled." "I have an assistant?" Natalie asked, surprised. "All senior project coordinators do," Jessica said cheerfully. "Come on, I'll show you your space." Natalie's office was on the 15th floor with a window view of the city. It wasn't huge, but it was professional and comfortable with a desk, computer, file cabinets, and a small seating area. True to Adrian's word, one corner had been set up with a colorful rug, a basket of toys, and a small bookshelf filled with children's books. "Mr. Wolfe had facilities set this up over the weekend," Jessica explained. "He said your daughter might need to visit occasionally and wanted her to have a comfortable space." Natalie felt tears threaten but pushed them back. She'd cried enough over the past few days. Time to prove she deserved this opportunity. The morning was spent in orientation meetings. HR walked her through benefits and policies. IT set up her computer access and email. Her supervisor, a kind man named Robert Chen, explained the projects she'd be managing, and introduced her to the team members she'd be working with. "I'll be honest," Robert said during their one-on-one meeting. "There was some discussion about your hiring. The executive panel felt their recommendation should have been followed, but Mr. Wolf was adamant, said you were exactly what this company needed. So welcome to the team. Prove him right." "I intend to," Natalie said firmly. Her first project was coordinating the launch of a new software security product. Multiple departments involved, tight deadline, complex logistics, exactly the kind of challenge Natalie thrived on. She threw herself into the work, organizing meetings, creating timelines, identifying potential obstacles and developing solutions. By the end of her first week, Robert was impressed. "You're good at this," he said during their Friday check-in. "Really good. The way you anticipated that supply chain issue before it became a problem saved us at least 2 weeks of delays. Where'd you learn to think that way?" "Single parenthood," Natalie said with a slight smile. "You learn to anticipate problems when you're managing a 5-year-old on a limited budget. If I didn't plan ahead for Rosie getting sick or daycare closing unexpectedly or any of a dozen other potential issues, we'd be in constant crisis mode. That skill set translates pretty well to project management." Robert laughed. "I'll have to remember that. Maybe we should start recruiting more parents. If you've ever felt like your personal challenges made you stronger professionally, if you've ever had skills underestimated because they didn't come from a traditional source, share your story in the comments. Because sometimes the best qualifications come from life experience, not just resumes." Natalie saw Adrian occasionally during that first week, usually in passing in hallways or elevators. He always stopped to ask how she was settling in, how Rosie was adjusting to daycare, if she needed anything. His attention felt genuine rather than performative, like he actually cared about her well-being rather than just checking a box labeled good employer behavior. On Friday afternoon, Adrian stopped by her office. "How was your first week?" "Challenging in the best way," Natalie said honestly. "I love the work. The team is great. Robert is a good supervisor. I feel like I'm actually using my skills instead of just surviving." "Good," Adrian said with a smile. "And Rosie, how's she adjusting?" "She loves the new daycare," Natalie said. "They have an art program that she's obsessed with. She's made friends. She seems happier than she's been in months." "I'm glad." Adrian paused, then said, "I have a favor to ask, and please feel free to say no. But my nephew Caleb, who I mentioned raising, is turning 8 on Sunday. We're having a small party at my house, just family and a few friends. I wondered if you and Rosie would like to come. Caleb would love to meet her, and I think you'd enjoy meeting my family." Natalie hesitated. "Adrian, that's very kind, but I don't want to cross professional boundaries. You're my boss. Going to your house for a family party feels like I'm being friendly," Adrian suggested. "Natalie, I'm not asking as your boss. I'm asking as someone who'd like to get to know you better outside of work. And I think Rosie and Caleb would get along. But if you're uncomfortable, I completely understand." Natalie thought about it. The truth was, she wanted to go. She wanted to see Adrian outside the office setting, wanted to meet the nephew he'd mentioned, wanted Rosie to have a chance to play with other children in a non-daycare setting. But she was also wary of blurring lines between professional and personal. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course," Adrian said. "No pressure either way. The invitation is open if you decide you'd like to come." That evening, Natalie discussed it with Rosie while they ate dinner at the small table in their motel room. They were still living there, saving money for first and last month's rent on an actual apartment. The motel wasn't ideal, but at least it was stable now that Natalie had a steady income. "The nice man from the big office invited us to a party," Natalie told her daughter. "His nephew is having a birthday party. Would you like to go?" Rosie's eyes lit up. "A party with cake and games?" "Probably," Natalie said with a laugh. "Birthday parties usually have those things." "Can we go, Mama? Please?" Looking at her daughter's excited face, Natalie made her decision. They'd go, not because Adrian was her boss or because she felt obligated, but because Rosie deserved fun experiences, and Natalie deserved to have connections beyond work and stress. She texted Adrian that evening, "We'd love to come to Caleb's party. What can we bring?" His response came quickly. "Just yourselves. Party starts at 2 on Sunday. I'll text you the address." Sunday arrived sunny and warm. Natalie dressed herself and Rosie in casual but nice clothes, wrapped the gift they'd picked out. A book about dragons that Rosie had insisted was perfect for an 8-year-old boy, and took a bus to the address Adrian had sent. His house was in an upscale neighborhood but not ostentatious. A beautiful 2-story contemporary home with large windows and a welcoming front porch. Natalie rang the bell, suddenly nervous. Adrian answered, and Natalie's breath caught. She'd only ever seen him in business suits. Now he wore jeans and a simple blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked younger, more relaxed, more approachable, and devastatingly handsome in a way that made Natalie's heart skip. "You came," he said with genuine pleasure. "Come in. Caleb and the other kids are in the backyard." The house was beautiful inside, decorated with warmth and personality rather than looking like a showpiece. Family photos on the walls, comfortable furniture, lived-in spaces that showed this was a home, not just a house. Adrian led them through to the backyard where about a dozen children were playing on an impressive playground set, while adults stood around talking and laughing. An older woman who looked like she might be in her 60s approached with a warm smile. "You must be Natalie," she said. "I'm Margaret, Adrian's aunt. He's told me all about you and this darling girl." She smiled at Rosie. "The other children are playing. Would you like to join them?" Rosie looked at Natalie for permission. When Natalie nodded, she ran off toward the playground, still clutching Mr. Snuggles. "She's beautiful," Margaret said to Natalie, "and Adrian tells me you're doing excellent work at the company already. That's wonderful." Over the next few hours, Natalie met Adrian's family. Margaret, who'd helped raise him, and Caleb, Adrian's sister Grace, Caleb's mother, a warm woman in her mid-30s who worked as a nurse, several cousins and their families. They welcomed Natalie without judgment or curiosity about her circumstances, treating her like she belonged, rather than like she was some charity case Adrian had taken on. Natalie found herself relaxing, laughing at stories about Adrian's childhood, watching Rosie play happily with the other children. It felt normal in a way her life hadn't felt in years, like she was part of a community rather than struggling alone on the outside. At one point, she found herself standing by the fence watching the kids while Adrian joined her. "Thank you for coming," he said. "It means a lot to me that you're here." "Thank you for inviting us," Natalie replied. "Your family is wonderful, and Rosie is having the time of her life." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, then Adrian asked, "Can I tell you something?" "Of course. That first day, when I walked into that conference room and saw you sitting there with Rosie, I saw myself 15 years ago, desperate, trying so hard to keep it together, one rejection away from losing everything. And I saw my nephew, the child I was raising alone, trying to understand why adults were being cruel to his uncle. I knew in that moment I had to help you, not out of pity, but out of recognition. You were me. And I remembered how much that one investor's belief changed my life." He turned to look at her directly. "But Natalie, over this past week, I've come to realize something else. You're not just someone I helped. You're someone I genuinely like, someone I enjoy talking to, someone whose company I seek out not out of obligation but because I want to, and I don't know what to do with that. Ever." Natalie's heart was racing. "Adrian, I work for you. There's a power dynamic that makes anything beyond professional interaction complicated." "I know," he said, "and I'm not suggesting we act on anything. I'm just being honest about how I feel. You should know that I like you, Natalie, not as an employee or someone I helped, but as a person I find fascinating and inspiring and genuinely wonderful to be around." "I like you too," Natalie heard herself admit, "more than is probably wise given our professional relationship. But Adrian, I can't risk this job. It's the only thing keeping Rosie and me from being homeless. If something happened between us and it didn't work out, I'd lose everything I've just started to rebuild." "I understand completely," Adrian said, "and I wouldn't ask you to risk your security. So here's what I propose. We table this conversation. We continue as we are professional at work, friendly outside of work if we both choose, and maybe someday, when you feel more secure in your position and less vulnerable, We can revisit this. Does that work?" It was the most respectful, understanding response Natalie could have asked for. "That works. Thank you for being honest with me, instead of just keeping these feelings hidden and letting them complicate things." "Always honest," Adrian promised. "That's something I can commit to regardless of anything else." The party continued, and Natalie found herself enjoying it immensely. Caleb was a sweet, energetic boy who loved the dragon book they'd brought. Grace pulled Natalie aside to thank her for coming and to say she hoped they'd see each other again soon. Margaret gave Natalie her phone number and insisted she call if she ever needed anything. As Natalie and Rosie prepared to leave, Adrian walked them to the car he'd arranged to drive them home. He'd insisted, and Natalie was too tired to argue. "Thank you again for coming," he said. "This meant more than you probably realize." "Thank you for including us," Natalie replied, "for making us feel like we belonged." In the car, Rosie chatted excitedly about the games she'd played and the friends she'd made. Natalie listened with a full heart, grateful beyond measure for the turn her life had taken. 1 week ago, she'd been desperate and alone. Now she had a job she loved, financial stability beginning to form, and the start of genuine friendships. And maybe, someday when the timing was right and the power dynamics less fraught, something more with a man who saw her worth when everyone else had been ready to dismiss her. The following week settled into a comfortable routine. Natalie excelled at work, managing complex projects with a skill that earned respect from even the executives who'd been ready to reject her. She moved out of the motel and into a modest 2-bedroom apartment, thrilled to give Rosie her own room. They decorated it together with inexpensive finds from discount stores, making it colorful and cheerful. Rosie thrived in her new daycare, making friends and developing her artistic talents. She talked constantly about her teachers and her friends and the projects they worked on. The constant stress and worry that had marked her early years was fading, replaced by the security every child deserved. Natalie saw Adrian regularly at work, their interactions professional but warm. He checked on her progress, offered support when projects got challenging, celebrated her successes. Outside of work, they occasionally crossed paths at company events or when Natalie visited Grace to let the kids have playdates. Their relationship was friendly but carefully bounded, both of them honoring the agreement to wait before exploring anything deeper. But Natalie couldn't deny the growing feelings. Every conversation with Adrian revealed more of his character, his intelligence, his kindness, his dry sense of humor, his dedication to doing right by people. He was the opposite of her ex-husband in every way that mattered. Where Travis had been selfish and cruel, Adrian was generous and compassionate. Where Travis had made her feel small, Adrian made her feel valued. 3 months after starting her job, Natalie was asked to present her recommendations for family-friendly workplace policies to the executive board. She'd spent weeks researching best practices, surveying employees, and developing comprehensive proposals for flexible scheduling, backup childcare resources, enhanced parental leave, and support systems for working parents. The presentation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Natalie prepared meticulously, creating slides and handouts, anticipating questions and objections. When the day arrived, she walked into that conference room, the same one where she'd been rejected just months ago with confidence earned through hard work and proven results. Patricia Chen was there, along with the rest of the executives who'd dismissed her. Adrian sat at the head of the table, his expression encouraging but letting her handle this on her own. Natalie's presentation was thorough and compelling. She backed every recommendation with data showing how family-friendly policies led to better employee retention, higher productivity, and improved company culture. She addressed concerns about costs by demonstrating long-term savings from reduced turnover. She proposed pilot programs that could be tested and refined before full implementation. By the end, even Patricia looked impressed. "This is comprehensive work, Miss Hayes. You've clearly put considerable thought and research into these proposals." "Thank you," Natalie said. "These policies matter to me personally, but more importantly, they matter to dozens of employees at this company who are trying to balance professional excellence with family responsibilities. We have talented people who are burning out or leaving because we're not supporting them adequately. These changes would help us retain and attract the best workers. The board voted to approve a 6-month pilot program of Natalie's key recommendations. As the meeting ended, Linda Marsh from HR pulled Natalie aside. "I owe you an apology," Linda said quietly. "When you came in for that interview with your daughter, I judged you. I assumed you were unprofessional and couldn't handle the job. I was wrong. You've been an asset to this company, and your work on these policy recommendations is going to help a lot of people. I'm sorry for how I treated you." "Apology accepted," Natalie said graciously, "and thank you for saying that." Patricia approached next, her expression less warm but genuine. "You've proven yourself, Miss Hayes. I didn't think you would, but you have. Well done. Well done." It wasn't a full apology, but it was acknowledgement. Natalie would take it. After everyone else had left, Adrian remained. "That was impressive. You handled their questions brilliantly." "I was terrified," Natalie admitted, "but I believed in the material. That made it easier to defend it." "You should be proud," Adrian said. 3 months ago, you were trying to convince them you deserved a job. Today, you convinced them to change company policies. That's significant growth. "I had a good mentor," Natalie said with a smile. "Someone who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Adrian's expression grew serious. "Natalie, it's been 3 months. You've proven yourself professionally beyond any doubt. You have job security, your work speaks for itself. So I'm wondering if maybe we could revisit that conversation we had at Caleb's birthday party." Natalie's heart raced. She'd been thinking about this too, wondering when the right time might be, if there ever would be a right time. "I'm still your employee. The power dynamic still exists." "It does," Adrian agreed, "but I'm wondering if we could navigate it carefully. Dating, but keeping work and personal life completely separate. If it doesn't work out, your job is secure regardless. I'd never let personal feelings impact professional decisions, and I think we both know there's something here worth exploring." Natalie thought about it. The truth was, she'd been developing feelings for months. She looked forward to seeing Adrian, enjoyed their conversations, found herself thinking about him when she should be focused on other things. She was attracted to him physically, yes, but more than that, she admired who he was as a person. "We'd have to be careful," she said slowly. "Discreet at work, professional boundaries maintained. And Adrian, if this doesn't work out, we need to commit to handling it maturely so it doesn't impact my job or Rosie's stability." "Agreed on all counts," Adrian said. "So is that a yes? Will you go to dinner with me? Actual date dinner, not colleagues getting food?" Natalie smiled, her heart full of hope and possibility. "Yes, I'd like that very much." Their first date was that Friday evening. Adrian picked her up from her apartment, looking handsome in dark jeans and a grey sweater. They went to a small Italian restaurant he loved, cozy and intimate without being pretentious. Over pasta and wine, they talked about everything and nothing, childhoods and dreams, favorite books and movies, embarrassing moments and proud achievements. "Tell me about Rosie's father," Adrian said gently. "Only if you're comfortable. But I'd like to understand that part of your history." Natalie took a deep breath, then told him about Travis, about meeting him in college, about how charming he'd seemed at first, about the gradual shift to controlling behavior, the anger, the way he made her feel like everything was her fault, about getting pregnant and hoping a baby would fix things, the common delusion of people in abusive relationships. "When Rosie was 2, he just disappeared," Natalie said. "Came home one day and he was gone, took his clothes, emptied our bank account, left a note saying he couldn't handle the responsibility of a family. I haven't heard from him since. No child support, no visits, nothing. It's like we never existed to him." "I'm sorry," Adrian said. "You and Rosie both deserve better than that." "We got better," Natalie said with a slight smile. "Eventually, after a lot of struggle and hardship. But we made it through, and now we're here, building something stable and good." "What do you tell Rosie about her father?" Adrian asked. "The truth, in age-appropriate ways," Natalie said. "That her daddy loved her but wasn't ready to be a parent. That sometimes adults make mistakes and can't be part of our lives. That it's not her fault, and she's loved completely by me. As she gets older, I'll tell her more. But for now, that's enough. They talked until the restaurant was preparing to close, then walked through a nearby park where street lamps cast warm light and the evening air was perfect. At Natalie's apartment door, Adrian kissed her goodnight, gentle, respectful, leaving her wanting more. "I had a wonderful time," he said. "Me too," Natalie replied. "When can we do this again? How about Sunday? We could take Rosie and Caleb to the zoo. Make it a family thing." "I'd love that," Natalie said. Their relationship developed over the following months, slowly and carefully. They dated, spending time together on weekends and occasional weekday evenings when Rosie was at sleepovers with friends. At work, they maintained professional boundaries, interacting as supervisor and employee without personal entanglement bleeding through. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when Natalie wanted to reach for Adrian's hand during a meeting, or when maintaining professional distance felt like unnecessary pretense. But they'd committed to keeping work and personal separate, and they honored that commitment. Rosie and Caleb became close, the age difference not preventing genuine friendship. Rosie adored having an older brother figure who played games with her and read her stories. Caleb enjoyed having a younger kid who thought he was the coolest person ever. Grace and Natalie developed their own friendship, bonding over the challenges and joys of single parenthood. 6 months after their first date, Adrian took Natalie to the coffee shop where they'd had their first real conversation outside of work. They sat at the same table, drinking the same drinks, but everything was different now. "I love you," Adrian said simply. "I've been wanting to tell you for weeks, but I wanted to wait for the right moment, and I realize there's no perfect moment. There's just now, and how I feel, and wanting you to know." Natalie felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I love you too. I've loved you for months but was afraid to say it. Afraid of being vulnerable again after Travis. Afraid of risking what we have." "What if we stopped being afraid?" Adrian asked. "What if we committed to this fully? Not rushing. We'll take whatever time we need, but acknowledging that this is real and significant and worth investing in completely." "I'd like that," Natalie said. "I'm ready for that." Over the next year, their relationship deepened into partnership. Adrian was involved in Rosie's life in ways that felt natural rather than forced. He attended her kindergarten performances, helped with homework, took her to father-daughter events at school when she asked if he could be her stand-in dad. He never tried to replace Travis, but he filled the father role with genuine love and commitment. Natalie continued to excel at work, taking on increasingly complex projects and mentoring new employees. The family-friendly policies she'd championed were implemented company-wide after the pilot program's success, making Harrington Enterprises one of the most parent-friendly tech companies in the region. 2 years after that disastrous interview where Natalie had been rejected for bringing her daughter, Adrian planned a surprise. He took Natalie and Rosie back to that same conference room, the space where everything had changed. "Why are we here?" Natalie asked, confused. "Because this is where our story really began," Adrian said. "Where I saw you for who you really were. Where I made the decision to believe in you." So, he knelt down in front of Rosie first. "Rosie, I want to ask your mum to marry me, but I wanted to ask your permission first. Is it okay if I marry your mama and become part of your family officially?" Rosie's eyes went wide. "You want to be my real daddy?" "I want to be your daddy, in every way that matters," Adrian said gently. "I'll never replace your birth father, but I promise to love you and your mom with everything I have. So what do you say? Can I marry your mama?" "Yes," Rosie shrieked, throwing her arms around Adrian's neck. "Yes, yes, yes." Then Adrian turned to Natalie, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Natalie Hayes, you are the strongest, most resilient, most inspiring person I've ever met. You took every obstacle life threw at you and turned it into motivation to keep fighting. You're an incredible mother, an amazing partner, and the love of my life. Will you marry me?" Natalie was sobbing now, happy tears streaming down her face. "Yes. Oh my God, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her and Rosie into a group hug, while all 3 of them cried and laughed. They were married 8 months later in a small ceremony with close friends and family. Rosie served as flower girl, beaming with pride as she scattered rose petals. Grace stood as Natalie's maid of honor. Caleb was Adrian's best man, and when the officiant asked if anyone objected to the marriage, he added a personal touch. "Especially you, Rosie. Any objections?" "No objections," Rosie shouted, making everyone laugh. At the reception, Adrian gave a toast that brought everyone to tears. 3 years ago, I walked into a conference room expecting a routine interview. Instead, I found my future wife and daughter being dismissed by executives who couldn't see past circumstances to potential. That moment changed my life. Natalie and Rosie didn't just become my family. They taught me what really matters in life and in business. They showed me that the people we often overlook are sometimes the ones with the most to offer. He looked at Natalie with love shining in his eyes. "I didn't save you that day, Natalie. You saved yourself. You just needed someone to see you. And seeing you, truly seeing you, was the greatest gift I've ever received. I love you. I love our daughter. And I promise to spend the rest of my life proving worthy of the trust you placed in me when you said yes to dinner, yes to partnership, yes to forever." Natalie's own toast was shorter but equally emotional. 3 years ago, I was rejected for bringing my daughter to an interview. I thought my life was over. Then Adrian walked into that room and changed everything. Not with money or power, but with compassion and belief. He saw my worth when I'd forgotten it. He gave me a chance to prove myself, and in the process, he gave me and Rosie a family we never dreamed we'd have. She raised her glass. To second chances, to seeing people for who they really are, to love that develops from respect and grows into something beautiful. And to the man who looked at a desperate single mother and saw someone worth believing in, "I love you, Adrian. Thank you for seeing me." As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Natalie thought about the journey that had brought them here. The desperation and fear of that morning when her babysitter cancelled. The humiliation of being rejected by the interview panel. The moment when Adrian had walked in and everything changed. She'd been rejected for bringing her daughter to the interview. But that rejection had led to the most important acceptance of her life. Not just the job, though that mattered, but being seen, valued, loved for exactly who she was, a strong, capable woman who happened to also be a devoted mother. That was the real transformation. Not from poor to wealthy or struggling to stable, though those changes mattered, but from invisible to seen, from dismissed to valued, from alone to partnered, from surviving to thriving. And it all started because one man had looked at a woman and child in a conference room and decided they deserved dignity, respect, and a chance to prove their worth. 5 years after Natalie had been rejected for bringing her daughter to an interview, she sat in her corner office on the 18th floor of Harrington Enterprises, the same floor where that fateful interview had taken place, and marveled at how completely her life had transformed. She was now Vice President of Human Resources and Family Initiatives, a position created specifically for her after the overwhelming success of the family-friendly policies she'd championed. The corner where she'd sat with Rosie during that interview, the spot where her daughter had colored quietly while executives judged Natalie's worth, was now part of her office suite. She'd kept it deliberately, transforming it into a small lounge area with comfortable seating, toys, and books, a reminder of where she'd started and how far she'd come. Rosie was 10 now, thriving in 5th grade, confident and creative and surrounded by friends. She took art classes after school, played soccer on weekends, and had recently announced she wanted to be either a veterinarian or a fashion designer when she grew up. The scared 5-year-old who'd clutched her worn teddy bear in a corporate lobby was now a vibrant child with dreams that felt achievable rather than impossible. Adrian was more than Natalie had ever dared to hope for. He'd formally adopted Rosie 2 years ago, a process that had involved paperwork and court appearances, and finally, beautifully, a certificate that declared him legally her father. Rosie had cried happy tears when the judge announced the adoption was finalized, throwing herself into Adrian's arms and saying, "I have a real daddy now, a daddy who chose me." They'd recently welcomed a son, James, now 6 months old, and already showing signs of his father's stubborn determination and his mother's gentle nature. Watching Adrian with both children, seeing him be the father Rosie had always deserved and James would grow up with from the start, filled Natalie with a gratitude so profound it sometimes overwhelmed her. But today, Natalie wasn't thinking about her personal happiness, though that remained a constant source of joy. Today, she was preparing for a presentation that felt as significant as the policy recommendations she'd made 3 years ago. Harrington Enterprises was hosting a conference on workplace equity and family support, bringing together executives from dozens of major companies to discuss best practices for supporting working parents. Natalie was the keynote speaker. Her topic, From Rejected to Respected, How Inclusive Hiring Practices Benefit Everyone. The irony wasn't lost on her. 5 years ago, she'd been sitting in a conference room being told she couldn't separate her personal life from work, that bringing her daughter to an interview demonstrated unacceptable judgment, that companies like Harrington Enterprises needed employees who prioritized business over family. Now she was standing in front of hundreds of business leaders, explaining why those attitudes were wrong and harmful to both employees and companies. If you've ever been judged for circumstances beyond your control, if you've ever had to choose between your livelihood and your family, if you've ever felt discriminated against because of your parenting status, this story is for you. Share it in the comments and let's change the narrative together. The conference center was packed. Executives from tech companies, retail chains, healthcare organizations, manufacturing firms, all there to learn about creating workplaces that supported rather than penalized working parents. Natalie stood backstage, reviewing her notes one final time, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves that came before any major presentation. Adrian found her there, baby James sleeping against his shoulder in a carrier. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous," Natalie admitted. "I'm about to tell a room full of powerful executives that they're doing things wrong. That's intimidating." "You're not telling them they're wrong," Adrian corrected gently. "You're showing them a better way. There's a difference. And Natalie, you're the perfect person to deliver this message. You've lived it. You've implemented solutions that work. You have the data to back up every recommendation. They need to hear this from you." He was right. Of course, Natalie had the statistics memorized. Since implementing family-friendly policies 5 years ago, Harrington Enterprises had seen a 43% reduction in employee turnover, a 28% increase in productivity, and had been named one of the best places to work for parents 3 years running. Employee satisfaction scores had soared, particularly among working mothers and single parents. The business case was clear and compelling. "You've got this," Adrian said, kissing her forehead. "Go change some minds." Natalie walked onto that stage to applause, looking out at hundreds of faces waiting to hear what she had to say. She took a breath, centered herself, and began. "5 years ago, I sat in a conference room in this very building, being interviewed for a position I desperately needed. I was a single mother, recently unemployed, weeks away from homelessness. I'd lost my apartment, my stability, my sense of security. This job represented everything I needed to rebuild my life and provide for my daughter." She clicked to the next slide, showing the image she'd commissioned of that day, an artistic representation of a woman and child sitting in a corporate conference room. The woman's expression, a mixture of desperation and determination. "That morning, my babysitter cancelled due to illness. I had no family nearby, no backup childcare, no options except to bring my 5-year-old daughter with me or cancel the interview. I made the choice to bring her, knowing it might cost me the opportunity but unable to give up without trying." Another slide, showing the statistics on single-parent employment challenges. "I was one of 13.6 million single parents in this country, one of the 80% who struggle with childcare as their primary barrier to employment, one of the 44% who have had to decline job interviews due to inflexible scheduling, one of the countless parents forced to choose between career opportunities and caring for their children." She could see people in the audience nodding, recognizing the statistics, perhaps thinking about policies in their own companies. When I walked into that interview with my daughter, I was met with immediate disapproval. The executive panel made it clear they viewed my presence with a child as unprofessional, irresponsible, and indicative of someone who couldn't separate personal and professional life. One executive told me directly, "We don't hire people who can't separate their personal lives from work." A murmur went through the crowd. Some looked uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing their own biases reflected in the story. I was rejected. Not because I lacked qualifications I'd scored highest among all candidates on the skills assessment. Not because I lacked experience, I had 6 years of relevant project coordination work. I was rejected because I had a child, because I was a single mother, because my life didn't fit into the neat box of what a professional employee should look like. Natalie paused, letting that sink in. But then something unexpected happened. The CEO of this company, my now husband, Adrian Wolf, walked into that conference room. He looked at me sitting there with my daughter and said something I've never forgotten. She didn't bring a problem. She brought her reason to succeed, her motivation for wanting this job, her purpose for working hard and being dedicated. A new slide appeared, showing the photo from that day that had gone semi-viral within business circles, Adrian helping Natalie to her feet, while panel members looked on with mixed expressions of shock and disapproval. Adrian hired me that day, not despite my circumstances, but recognizing that those circumstances had given me skills and determination that would make me an exceptional employee. And he was right. But more importantly, he challenged this company to rethink its approach to working parents, to recognize that being a parent doesn't make you less professional. It often makes you more organized, more efficient, more skilled at managing complex situations under pressure. The next series of slides showed the policies Harrington Enterprises had implemented: flexible scheduling, backup childcare resources, enhanced parental leave, support systems for working parents, on-site childcare options, lactation rooms, emergency family leave, and dozens of other initiatives designed to support employees with families. The results speak for themselves, Natalie said, showing the business metrics. 43% reduction in turnover, 28% increase in productivity, dramatic improvements in employee satisfaction and engagement. We're attracting top talent specifically because of these policies. Parents want to work here because they know they won't be penalized for having families, and that's made us a stronger, more competitive company. She could see executives in the audience taking notes, leaning forward with interest. But this isn't just about business metrics, Natalie continued, her voice growing more passionate. This is about basic human dignity, about recognizing that employees are whole people with lives and responsibilities outside of work, about understanding that supporting working parents benefits everyone: the parents who can pursue careers without sacrificing their families, the children who have financially stable homes and less stressed parents, the companies that retain talented employees and build stronger workplace cultures. A new slide showed statistics on workplace discrimination against mothers. The data was stark. 1 in 2 mothers experience discrimination at some point during pregnancy, parental leave, or return to work. Nearly a third look for other jobs or resign as a result. Single mothers face even higher rates of discrimination, with 18% reporting they were made redundant, dismissed, or had contracts not renewed specifically related to their parental status. These numbers represent real people, Natalie said. Real families, real careers derailed by outdated attitudes about what professional employees should look like and how they should prioritize work over everything else. Every percentage point represents hundreds of thousands of people who've been discriminated against, pushed out, forced to choose between their careers and their families. She showed the slide detailing recommendations for inclusive hiring practices, structured interviews that focus on skills rather than circumstances, policies against asking about childcare arrangements during interviews, flexibility in interview scheduling, virtual interview options, clear family leave policies outlined during the hiring process, and training for hiring managers on unconscious bias. When you reject qualified candidates because they have children, you're not protecting your company, Natalie said firmly. You're limiting your talent pool. You're perpetuating discrimination. You're creating a workplace culture that drives away some of your best potential employees, and you're making business decisions based on bias rather than data. The next slide showed success stories from companies that had implemented inclusive practices, tech firms that now had 50% female leadership after implementing family-friendly policies, retail chains that reduced turnover by 60% after offering flexible scheduling. healthcare organizations that improved patient care outcomes after supporting work-life balance for their staff. This isn't just the right thing to do morally, Natalie said. Though it is absolutely the right thing to do, this is smart business. Supporting working parents creates loyal, dedicated, productive employees who bring diverse perspectives and strong work ethics. It makes your company more attractive to top talent. It improves your reputation. It strengthens your bottom line. She clicked to the final slide, showing a recent photo of herself, Adrian, Rosie, and baby James, all of them smiling, a family built from second chances and compassionate choices. 5 years ago, I was rejected for bringing my daughter to an interview. I was told I couldn't separate personal and professional life, that I wasn't the kind of employee this company needed. But one person saw past circumstances to potential. One person recognized that being a parent was a strength, not a weakness. One person chose inclusion over discrimination. Natalie looked out at the audience directly. I'm asking you to be that person in your organizations, to question hiring practices that exclude working parents, to implement policies that support families, to create workplaces where people don't have to choose between their careers and their children, to recognize that when you support your employees' families, you strengthen your company. She paused for emphasis. Because somewhere in your city right now, there's a talented, qualified candidate sitting in a coffee shop wondering if they should even apply for your open position. They're worried about how to explain the gap in their resume when they stayed home with a sick child. They're concerned about whether they can manage the interview schedule with daycare pickup times. They're afraid of being judged for having family responsibilities. That candidate could be your next top performer, your next innovative leader, your next game-changing employee. But only if you create space for them, only if you look past circumstances to potential, only if you choose to see people for who they are and what they can contribute, not just whether they fit into outdated models of what professional employees should look like. Natalie concluded, 5 years ago, I was rejected for bringing my daughter to the interview. Today, I'm standing here as Vice President of Human Resources and Family Initiatives, having helped build one of the most parent-friendly workplaces in the country. That transformation wasn't magic, it was choice. Someone choosing to see my worth, someone choosing to challenge discriminatory practices, someone choosing inclusion over exclusion. Make that choice in your organizations. Review your hiring practices, update your family policies, train your managers on unconscious bias. Create workplaces where talented people can thrive professionally while also being present for their families. Because when you support working parents, everyone benefits. Your employees, your company, and ultimately, society as a whole. The applause that followed was thunderous. People stood, the ovation lasting several minutes. Natalie felt tears prick at her eyes but held them back, maintaining her professional composure even as emotion threatened to overwhelm her. During the Q&A session that followed, executives asked thoughtful questions about implementation challenges, budget considerations, how to address resistance from traditional leadership. Natalie answered each one with specific examples from Harrington Enterprises' experience, acknowledging difficulties but emphasizing that the results were worth the effort. One executive, a woman in her 50s who identified herself as CEO of a manufacturing company, stood to share her own experience. I was a single mother 30 years ago, she said, her voice shaking slightly. I was rejected from so many jobs because I had children. I eventually built my own company because it was the only way I could have both a career and be present for my kids. Your presentation brought back all those memories of sitting in interview rooms, feeling judged and dismissed. Thank you for doing this work. Thank you for changing the narrative. Another executive, a man who ran a tech startup, raised his hand. I have to be honest, my company doesn't have any of these policies. We've always operated on the assumption that we need people who can work long hours without distraction. But hearing you talk about the business benefits, seeing the data on retention and productivity, I'm realizing we're probably losing talented people because of our inflexibility. Where do we start? What's the first step? Natalie smiled. Start by listening to your employees. Ask them what they need. Survey them about work-life balance challenges. Then pick one policy to implement as a pilot program. Maybe it's flexible scheduling, maybe it's backup childcare resources. Whatever you choose, measure the results. Track retention, productivity, employee satisfaction. Let the data guide your decisions, and don't try to do everything at once. Small changes, consistently implemented, lead to culture transformation over time. After the presentation, dozens of executives approached Natalie wanting to continue the conversation. She exchanged contact information, agreed to consulting calls, shared resources and templates that Harrington Enterprises had developed. This was the work she'd been building toward for 5 years, not just transforming one company, but influencing industry-wide change. That evening, she and Adrian celebrated at their favorite restaurant, the same place they'd gone on their first date 5 years ago. They'd brought the kids this time, Rosie chattering excitedly about her soccer game that afternoon, while James gurgled happily in his high chair. "I'm proud of you," Adrian said, raising his glass. "What you did today, the impact you're having, it matters so much. You're changing lives, Natalie. Not just individual employees, but entire families. That's significant work. I couldn't have done any of it without you," Natalie said. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. You believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself." Everything that came after started with that moment, when you walked into the conference room and decided I was worth hiring, despite what the panel recommended. "You earned everything you've achieved," Adrian said firmly. "I opened one door. You walked through it and built an entire career. That's all you, Natalie. Your skills, your determination, your vision. I'm just lucky I get to watch you thrive." Rosie looked up from her coloring. "Daddy, are you and Mama talking about mushy stuff again?" They both laughed. "Yes, sweetheart," Natalie said. "Very mushy stuff. Gross," Rosie declared with 10-year-old certainty, but she was smiling. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, Natalie stood in James's nursery watching him sleep. Adrian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "How different my life is from 5 years ago," Natalie said. "That morning when my babysitter cancelled, I was so desperate and scared. I thought bringing Rosie to the interview would ruin my last chance. I was prepared to be rejected again, to face more judgment and discrimination. I'd almost accepted that maybe I didn't deserve better." She turned in Adrian's arms to face him. "But you saw me, really saw me. Not the single mother struggling to survive, though I was that. Not the desperate applicant who broke protocol, though I did that too. You saw someone with potential and skills and worth. You saw past circumstances to character, and you gave me a chance to prove myself. You proved yourself every single day since," Adrian said. "You proved the panel wrong. You proved that parents can be exceptional employees. You proved that supporting families makes companies stronger. You proved that compassion and business success aren't mutually exclusive. You changed this company, Natalie. And today, you started changing dozens more." "We changed this company," Natalie corrected. "Together. You provided the opportunity and the resources. I provided the perspective and the drive. That partnership, that's what made it work." Adrian kissed her softly. "Best partnership of my life." They stood there in the nursery, holding each other, watching their son sleep. Outside the window, the city lights twinkled like earthbound stars. 5 years ago, Natalie had been in a motel room in that same city, terrified about an interview that represented her last hope. Now she stood in a house she and Adrian had bought together, in a room where their son slept peacefully, building a life that seemed impossible back then. The transformation hadn't been magic. It had been choice. Natalie choosing to show up to that interview despite knowing the risks. Adrian choosing to see her worth despite the panel's rejection. Harrington Enterprises choosing to implement policies that supported families, and countless small choices every day after that, building toward the life they had now. 6 months later, Natalie received a letter that made her cry. It was from a woman named Jennifer, a single mother who'd been hired by one of the companies whose executives had attended the conference. "Dear Miss Hayes, I'm writing to thank you for changing my life, even though you don't know me. 6 months ago, I was called for an interview at a tech company. When I explained I'd need to bring my daughter because my childcare fell through, I expected to be rejected. Instead, the HR manager said they'd recently attended a conference where you spoke, and they'd implemented new policies about parent-friendly interviewing. They not only accommodated my daughter, but made her feel welcome. I got the job. I've been working there for 4 months now, and it's the best professional experience I've ever had. They have flexible scheduling, backup childcare, and a culture that doesn't penalize employees for having families. My daughter is thriving, I'm thriving, and for the first time in years, I feel like I have a real career path instead of just surviving. You don't know me, but you changed my life. Your advocacy, your willingness to share your story, your push for inclusive hiring practices, they created the opportunity that transformed my family's circumstances. I wanted you to know that your work matters, that it's having ripple effects far beyond what you probably realize. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up. Thank you for fighting for people like me. With deepest gratitude, Jennifer. Natalie kept that letter in her desk drawer, pulling it out on difficult days when progress felt slow or resistance to change felt overwhelming. Jennifer's letter, and dozens of others like it that arrived over the following years, reminded her why this work mattered. 10 years after that fateful interview, Harrington Enterprises was recognized as the #1 family-friendly employer in the country. Natalie's policies had been adopted by hundreds of companies. She'd written a book about inclusive workplace practices that became required reading in business schools. She'd testified before congressional committees about the need for better family leave policies nationally. But the work she was most proud of was the mentorship program she'd created, working directly with single parents facing employment discrimination, helping them navigate the job market, connecting them with inclusive employers, providing resources and support. Every person she helped felt like paying forward the chance Adrian had given her. Rosie was 15 now, a confident young woman who volunteered at the same mentorship program, helping younger kids with homework and sharing her own story about being the daughter of a single mother who'd been discriminated against but didn't give up. She remembered enough from those early struggling years to understand how far they'd come, and she'd developed a passion for social justice that made Natalie immensely proud. James was 5, starting kindergarten with none of the trauma or instability his sister had experienced at that age. He'd never known financial insecurity or housing uncertainty. He'd never watched his mother cry from exhaustion and desperation. He'd grown up in a stable, loving home with 2 parents who adored him and a sister who doted on him. The difference between their early childhoods represented the transformation Natalie had fought for, not just for herself, but for every parent trying to build a better life for their children. On the 10-year anniversary of her hiring, Harrington Enterprises threw a celebration. It was framed as honoring Natalie's contributions, but she'd insisted it be about celebrating the company's commitment to family-friendly policies and all the employees who'd benefited from them. The event was held in the same conference room where she'd been interviewed and rejected by the panel 10 years ago. Patricia Chen, now retired but still remembered for her role in that interview, attended at Natalie's specific invitation. "I owe you an apology," Patricia said when Natalie welcomed her. "I've owed you one for 10 years. I judged you unfairly that day. I let my biases about working mothers cloud my professional judgment. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." "Apology accepted," Natalie said graciously. "And thank you for coming today, for being willing to acknowledge what happened and how it was wrong. That takes courage. You've accomplished incredible things," Patricia said. "Things I never would have predicted. I learned a valuable lesson from my mistake with you. I've spent the past 10 years trying to be better, to challenge my own biases, to look past circumstances to potential. You taught me that, even though it came at a cost to you." During her speech at the celebration, Natalie reflected on the journey. 10 years ago, I was rejected for bringing my daughter to an interview. I sat in this very room being told I was unprofessional, that I couldn't separate personal and professional life, that this company needed employees without the complications of family responsibilities. She gestured to the audience, which included dozens of working parents employed by Harrington Enterprises. Today, this company employs hundreds of parents who bring their full selves to work. Parents who don't have to pretend their families don't exist, Parents who are supported when childcare falls through, or kids get sick, or school emergencies happen. Parents who are valued for the skills their parenting has given them, not penalized for having responsibilities outside of work. This transformation didn't happen because one person gave one speech or implemented one policy. It happened because people at every level of this organization chose to embrace change, chose to challenge old assumptions, chose to recognize that supporting families makes business sense and moral sense. She looked at Adrian, sitting in the front row with both kids. 10 years ago, someone saw my worth when I'd forgotten it. Someone recognized that bringing my daughter to an interview wasn't a sign of poor judgment, but a demonstration of determination and love. Someone gave me a chance that changed everything. But the real change wasn't that one person hiring me. The real change was building systems and policies that mean no one else has to rely on one compassionate person to get a fair chance. The real change was making inclusion the standard, not the exception. The real change was transforming company culture so that working parents are valued rather than penalized. Natalie concluded with the message that had become her life's work. If you're a hiring manager, I challenge you to examine your biases about working parents. If you're an executive, I challenge you to implement policies that support families. If you're an employee, I challenge you to advocate for yourself and your colleagues who are balancing work and family. Because somewhere right now, there's a talented, qualified person deciding whether to apply for your open position. They're worried about how their parental responsibilities will be perceived. They're afraid of being judged for having a family. They're one childcare cancellation away from missing their chance at the opportunity they desperately need. Make your organization the place where that person doesn't have to be afraid, where they can bring their full selves to work, where they're valued for their skills and character, not judged for their circumstances. Because when you reject qualified candidates for having families, everyone loses. But when you embrace inclusion, everyone wins. The applause was thunderous, and as Natalie stood there, looking out at the room that had once represented her biggest rejection and now represented her greatest triumph, she thought about that desperate morning 10 years ago. The morning when everything hung in the balance. The morning when she'd made the choice to show up despite knowing the risks. She'd been rejected for bringing her daughter to the interview, but that rejection had led to the most important acceptance of her life, not just getting hired, though that mattered, but being seen, valued, respected for exactly who she was, a dedicated professional who also happened to be a devoted mother. 10 years later, Natalie Hayes-Wolf had transformed workplace culture for thousands of families. She'd changed hiring practices, influenced policy decisions, and created a legacy that would benefit working parents for generations to come. And it all started because one person looked at a desperate single mother in a conference room and decided she deserved dignity, respect, and a chance to prove her worth. That was the real story. Not rescue or charity, but recognition and opportunity. Not one person saving another, but one person reminding another of the strength they already possessed. If this story touched you, if you've ever faced discrimination for your family status, if you believe everyone deserves a fair chance regardless of their circumstances, share this message, because change happens when enough people decide outdated attitudes need challenging, when enough companies implement inclusive policies, when enough individuals choose compassion over judgment. Natalie was rejected for bringing her daughter to the interview. But that rejection became the catalyst for transformation that changed thousands of lives. Because sometimes our biggest setbacks contain the seeds of our greatest achievements. Sometimes being rejected opens doors to opportunities we never could have imagined. Sometimes the moments when we feel most judged become the moments that define who we're meant to become. Thank you for joining Natalie, Adrian, and Rosie on their journey from rejection to respect, from discrimination to dignity, from survival to thriving. May their story inspire us all to create workplaces where parents are valued, families are supported, and everyone gets a fair chance to prove their worth.